Well, good morning. You know, I've struggled a little bit over this past week because, in my mind, I like to think that I am the bravest person ever. But the more I learn about bravery and God's kind of bravery, the more I realize that I have a long ways to go. Because to be honest, I'm not really that brave. In fact, truth be told, I'm kind of the opposite of brave. And so it's been hard for me to find my words through all of this, but my prayer is that God would take this unbrave fella and teach me to be brave. And maybe this morning that would be your prayer as well. Now, they say that a crisis never makes a man. A crisis only reveals what he already is. And that thought is both comforting and frightening at the same time, because we all wonder, how would we react if everything that we held dear was really on the line? Our family, our health, our career, our life. And honestly, that's what's been so revealing about this pandemic. We wonder, would we have the faith to make it, or would we just collapse? All the things that we say we believe, would they still be enough when the crunch comes? We all wonder, what would we do in that moment if everything we held dear was on the line? That's one of the reasons why we remember Todd Beamer. And if you were on the flight 93 on September 11th, 2001, and the terrorists had taken over the plane, what would you have done? Would you have kept quiet? Or would you have been on the phone saying, "Are you ready? Let's roll"? And join the others who are storming down the aisle toward their destiny. If everything we believed was coming down to one crystallized moment, if we had to decide where we really stood, if it was our family or our wife or our husband or our kids or our job, if everything we held dear was on the line, would we have the courage? Would we have the faith? Would we have the fortitude? Would we be brave and be there when it really counted? Now, there are certain stories in the Bible that become so well known that when we mention the person's name, we automatically think of a particular event. When we say Noah, we think of the flood. When we say Joshua, we think of Jericho. When we say David, we think of Goliath. When we say Daniel, we think of the lion's den. When we say Elijah, we think of the crisis on Mount Carmel. Now, Mount Carmel is an enormous mountain by the seacoast, and it's a very important place because it has some military and geopolitical reasons. Whoever held Mount Carmel controlled the northern half of the nation of Israel. And whoever controlled the worship on Mount Carmel controlled the nation spiritually. And so the priests and the prophets of Baal knew that. And that's why years earlier they built an altar to Baal on top of Mount Carmel. Now we're going to pick up this story in 1 Kings chapter 18. Israel had been on a downward spiral for many years, and they had begun to worship a lot of other gods besides the one true God. And the main one in particular was called Baal. Baal was the sun god or the fire god, and they believed he controlled the rising and the setting of the sun. He would make or withhold the rain. And Asherah was kind of like Baal's wife. The king during this time was named Ahab. He was a spineless wimp. On one hand, he kind of worshiped God. He gave his kids God-honoring names like Ahaziah, which means owned by Jehovah. He named another of his kids Jehoram, which means Jehovah is exalted. And we know back then that names meant something. They meant something. But on the other hand, he married the wicked witch of the West, Jezebel, who was fully committed to Baal worship. She killed God's prophets. She trying to make Baal worship the state religion, and King Ahab didn't do anything about it. And so God raises up Elijah, and his mission is to show that there is only one God and to call the people of Israel back to him. Elijah's name literally means the Lord is God. His whole life's mission is to show what is distinctive about God, what makes him different from all the other gods. Remember, they had gods for everything. They had Baals for everything: sex, success, fertility, power. And as we sit in our cars this morning or we watch from our high-tech devices on our living room couch, we laugh in our head when we read about this, about these silly, primitive people with all their little gods. And we are so far advanced from them. Yet we worship the same things they do. See, all humans are worshipers. We find something to which we assign worth to. Something that defines us. Something we could not live without. Where we say, without that, we can't be happy. Or we say, without that, life would not be worth living. And you say, not me, Pastor Jeff. I'm not a worshiper. I'm not religious. Then you don't understand how your soul works. You may not be religious in the traditional sense, but you have found something in your life that gives you worth, something that makes life worth living, and you worship that thing. You have to have it. That's at the heart of what an idol is. You cannot imagine life being good without it. Instead of God, it has become your primary security, your primary source of fulfillment, your identity. And an idol is not usually a bad thing. It's usually a good thing. But what happens is we turn it into a God thing. For some, it's money, our primary source of security. Nothing wrong with money. But it can become the thing you have to have. You're worried about it all the time. You won't obey God or be generous with your tithe. You become willing to sacrifice your integrity or maybe even your family in order to get it. We all have idols. I'll tell you a few in my life. I'm not proud of these. But one is, at different seasons of my life, I've made the church. I've made ministry, what I do, the number one most important thing in my life. Now, it's obvious that serving the church is my calling. It's what I'm here to do. But even as I do it in the name of God, it can become my God. Another is food. May seem silly, but over the course of my life, food's always been there for me. It wasn't just a source of fuel, it was the source of comfort for me. And if you remember back a few years back, if you saw me, you always saw a Mountain Dew in my hand. I had it all times. I couldn't imagine life being good without a Mountain Dew. I was addicted. It was a god to me. Another of my idols I struggle with is financial or future security. If I could just save enough, then one day out there in the future, I'll have this secure thing. And I won't have to worry about, and I won't need anything. And I'm constantly consumed by it at times. And it's not because I save a lot of money, because I don't. It's really the fact that I don't have that much money and I don't put that much away. And I'm consumed by this desire to do that. I don't know what it is for you, but I know that you have them. You have as many Baals in your heart as Jezebel tried to put in Israel. John Calvin put it this way: the human heart is an idol factory. We got them in our day just like Elijah had it in their day. So don't think that this battle isn't relevant to you. This is the battle for your heart. And so because of all this, God sends Elijah to King Ahab to tell him that there's not going to be any rain in Israel until God gives the word. And so for more than 3 years, there hasn't been any rain. The ground turned brown. The creeks dried up. The brooks disappeared. The Jordan River became a trickle. There was famine. There was no crops. Animals were dying. And finally, God tells Elijah, I want you to go see King Ahab. We're going to pick it up in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 17 to 25. And this is what it says. It says, when Ahab saw him, he said, so there you are, the worst troublemaker in Israel. I'm not a troublemaker, Elijah answered. You are. You and your father. You are disobeying the Lord's commands and worshiping the idols of Baal. Now order all the people of Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. Bring along the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets to the goddess Asherah, who are supported by Queen Jezebel. So Ahab summoned all the Israelites and the prophets of Baal to meet him at Mount Carmel. Elijah went up to the people and said, how much longer will it take you to make up your minds? If the Lord is God, worship him. But if Baal is God, worship him." The people didn't say a word. Then Elijah said, "I am the only prophet of the Lord still left. But there are 450 prophets of Baal. Bring 2 bulls. Let the prophets of Baal take one. Kill it, cut it into pieces, put it on the wood, but don't light the fire. I will do the same with the other bull. Then let the prophets of Baal pray to their God, and I will pray to the Lord. And the one who answers by fire, he is God." The people shouted their approval. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Since there are so many of you, you take the bull, prepare it first, pray to your God, but don't set fire to the wood." Now, when we think about being brave, we just read what Elijah did, as if that's the norm. Like, it's normal to set up a meeting with the king and call him out for being fake with God, and to set up a challenge, an experiment to prove who the real God is, knowing that your life is going to be hanging in the balance. And we go, "Oh yeah, that's Bible. That's what everybody did back then. They did stuff like that." No, they didn't. Look at the landscape of Israel. No one was taking a stand. Which highlights the first thing we can learn about bravery from the life of Elijah, and that is this: God's kind of bravery begins with a choice. Now, there are certain things in life that you just have to make a choice about, even though it feels easier sometimes not to make a choice. If you've ever ordered tickets on Ticketmaster, back when we could go to large events, you remember back then? Y'all remember you had exactly 2 minutes. From the time you requested your tickets, you had exactly 2 minutes online to make all the rest of your decisions before the system kicks you off and you lose your tickets. I have never second-guessed myself more than during those 2 minutes. Am I sure this date works? Wait, do I want the mezzanine level? What is a mezzanine? Do I even really want to go see Legally Blonde, the musical? But if you don't make your choices, they kick you off and you lost your tickets forever. And it feels sometimes a whole lot easier to not make a choice. In verse 1 of 1 Kings 1:18, it says this: "The Lord said to Elijah, go and present yourself to King Ahab, and I will send rain." And then in verse 2, it says simply, so Elijah started out. Knowing the king, knowing the queen, knowing how prophets of God were being killed, knowing that his life was essentially being put on the line, there was probably a lot going on between the ears of Elijah's head. Verse 1 was the command. Verse 2 was Elijah's response. He had to make a decision. Was he going to go or was he going to stay home? And so in the middle of a culture that was not simply indifferent towards God, but was being led to become anti-God, Elijah was confronted with the decision to be brave. He was tasked with standing up to evil leadership, to confront a nation and to bring them to a point of decision. Bravery begins with a decision, a choice, a determination to move in a certain direction. And here's the deal, is you can't give what you don't got. You can't give what you don't got. I mean, Elijah couldn't get frustrated with other people for not making the decision to stand up if he wasn't first willing to make that decision in his own life. I mean, that's what leaders do. That's what God's kind of bravery does. How could he call other people to do something he wasn't willing to do himself? What did Elijah say to the people? He said, how much longer will it take you to make up your minds? If the Lord is God, worship him. If Baal is God, worship him. And see, some of us, we live our lives with this kind of thinking. That if we drag out long enough, if we let the dramatic pause hang there, then we won't actually have to make a decision. Things will just work itself out. We struggle making decisions. I wish we could show videos at Drive-In Church. I wish I could put a video right here and you could see it. And if I did, to illustrate this, this is what the video would be. It would be me asking Vicky where she wants to go to lunch after today. And I'm going to tell you, listen, it would be a 20-minute video, and at the end of it, we would end up going home and eating leftovers. William James explains it this way: when you have to make a choice and you don't make it, that is in itself a choice. When you have to make a choice and you don't make it, that is in itself a choice. And this is where a lot of us are with God. We've not rejected God, but we haven't really chosen him either. If you've rejected God, you're probably not in the parking lot this morning. You're probably not listening online. You wouldn't take the time. But you're not all in. Hear me. Bravery isn't found on the fence. It doesn't live there. So make a decision and see the kind of bravery God will grow in your life. The second thing about bravery that we can learn from Elijah's life is this, is that God's kind of bravery cuts through the lies. God's kind of bravery cuts through the lies. What do I mean? Verse 17, King Ahab comes at him with an accusation, and he says this: when Ahab saw him, he said, "So there you are, the worst troublemaker in Israel." I'm not sure if you ever turn on the TV or you get on the internet, but we live in a current climate that is hypersensitive to what is real and what is fake. And we don't always get it right. It's all about spinning things to make a certain narrative. It's all about tweaking the truth to create a headline. And that's what King Ahab does here with Elijah. The nation is falling apart. There's no rain. There's limited water. Crops are being destroyed. There's a famine. There's no food. Animals are dying. The nation is in crisis. And King Ahab blames Elijah for all the troubles. He says, "You're the reason. You're the cause. You're why we're in this mess. It's because of you." That's what people in power do. They blame everybody else. Check out Elijah's response. He says this: "I'm not the troublemaker. You are." And then he tells them why. "You disobeyed God's commands and you're worshiping the idols of Baal." I mean, another way of putting this is you can't change what you refuse to confront. You can't change what you refuse to confront. If Elijah had allowed the king to just spin the situation, if he had allowed the king to spread rumor and untruth, if he allowed the king to say what he wanted, tolerate the status quo, nothing would be different. What's brave about that? No, Elijah cut through the lies, and he did it with truth. There's something powerful about truth. The Bible says that it's freeing. And so Elijah confronts King Ahab with the truth. He corrected the spin. Instead of allowing him to blame shift, he held the king accountable, and it didn't just happen. It takes God's kind of bravery to speak truth to power. I mean, in your own life, part of the reason why maybe nothing's changing is because maybe you're unwilling to cut through the lies in your own life. Why? Because it's hard. Why? Because it's messy. Why? Because we don't like confrontation. But don't complain when things don't get better or when things get worse. See, some of us need to confront the lies in our own life. It's not necessarily a thing about calling out somebody else. It's about calling out yourself. We've been listening to our own self-talk. We've been rationalizing things. We started to believe things that God says are not true are now somehow true for you. Some of us need to confront the lies in our families. I'm sorry for the things that you have gone through. I'm sorry for the things that were said to you, but you are not a screw up. You are an incredible treasure. And you are deeply loved. Some of us need to confront the lies in our culture. It's not okay for young boys and young girls to be exploited sexually. That's why several years ago we hosted a conference. We wanted to educate people about it with the truth. That's why we've partnered with Without Permission, a local outreach that finds, frees, and supports victims. That's why we're putting on the Freedom Walk, August 29th. You can go online, sign up. And while we're raising money and shining a light and doing what we can do to cut through the lies, it says it's not a big deal. The lies that say it's not our problem. The lies that say that's for somebody else to deal with. And let me just talk to Christians for a moment. See, it's really popular right now to get on social media and to rant or to go down and physically protest the fact that there are regulations and limits on church right now. Hear me, I don't like the regulations. I'm not a fan of the limits, and you don't have to be either. You should speak your mind. You should share your heart. But examine yourself. Before you step up to that platform, whatever that is, why go public about the fact that you can't go to church when during times there were no restrictions, all you had were excuses? What does it say that you're protesting the persecution when you don't even engage in the ways that we can, like coming to drive-in church or logging online at home? My point is this: don't call others to do what you aren't doing. That's not truth. That's a lie. Bravery cuts through the lies. The final thing about bravery we can learn from Elijah's life is this: God's kind of bravery draws strength from God to take that stand. See, as the challenge gets started in the morning, the prophets of Baal and Asherah, there's 850 of them, they start first. They prepare their altar. They ask Baal to answer them, but no answer came. And so they danced, and they yelled, and they cut themselves. And at about noon, Elijah started saying stuff to them like maybe he's on a trip. Maybe he's in deep thought. Maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe he's asleep and you need to yell louder to wake him up. Elijah's doing some smack talking, but when all the drama died down, it was Elijah's turn and it was his moment of truth. See, it's easy to sit in the stands and talk trash. Some of us are good at it. But now the lights were on him. And so Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord and poured so much water on it that it overflowed into a trench that surrounded the altar. You see, to a people that had forgotten God, Elijah was saying, our God is a covenant God, and if we come back to Him, He will not turn us away. If we come back to Him, He will come through for us. Even though the people had forgotten, God was still ready to keep His promise. Elijah was trusting the promise of God. That's where his strength was coming from, because he literally was putting himself in a position where he was trusting God with his life. If God shows up, awesome. But if God doesn't show up, not awesome. That's God's kind of bravery. That's being present with God. And so everything was ready, and all Elijah needed now was a miracle. Elijah steps forward and he prays a very simple prayer. It's found in verse 36 and 37. It says this: At the hour of the afternoon sacrifice, the prophet Elijah approached the altar and prayed, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove now that you are the God of Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all this at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that this people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you are bringing them back to yourself. Talk about brave. On one side, you have 850 prophets to false gods. You have 10 hours of dancing, screaming, cutting themselves. You have all the prayers to their fake god. You have all the religiosity. And over here you have one man, you have God's man, and when he prays, he uses, in the English language, only 60 words. He prays for 3 things. Lord, answer me, so they know you're the true God. Answer me, so they know that I'm your prophet, and I'm doing this at your will. Answer me, so the hearts of the people may be turned back to you. Elijah's only concern was for God, his word, his work, his glory, his people. No screaming, no cutting, no theatrics, just simple, authentic trust. Elijah was God's kind of brave, and that bravery drew its strength from a deep trust in God. I don't know where you draw your strength from. Is it your job? Is it your family? Is it a relationship? Maybe you don't even know. And you're just kind of floating, hoping things work out. But what happens when your source fails you or is taken from you? That job is lost, that money runs out, that relationship ends, that an individual fails you, and your source is no longer your source for strength. And you realize that it still requires strength to move forward. What now? I'll tell you this, it's hard to be brave when you're wondering whether or not your tank is going to run empty or not. It's hard to be brave when your source can run out. God's kind of bravery draws its strength from God, a well that never runs dry, a source that never goes empty. As the worship team comes, I want to highlight something this morning. Elijah was God's kind of brave. He started with a choice, and he brought others along to come to a point of decision. Elijah was God's kind of brave. He cut through the lies, and he confronted them with the truth. Elijah was God's kind of brave, and he drew his strength from God and championed others to do the same. You see, Elijah took a stand. He stood. But it first started with him, and then he encouraged and challenged and championed others. Listen, maybe you need to be brave this morning and get off the fence. Not answering the question is in itself an answer. Make a decision. The decision might be to go all in with Jesus. The decision might be to surrender your life to Him, to begin a relationship with Him. We had our first outside youth service this last week. I'd call it a drive-in, but most of our students don't drive. But we had a service outside, much like this. And when we got to the point where, I'll tell you, we haven't met for almost 6 months. We've done the virtual thing, the Zoom thing. For nearly 6 months. And I got to tell you, a beautiful thing happened. When I asked this same question, this very same exact question, when I gave them the choice to surrender to Jesus, we had 3 students stand and make that decision. Isn't that awesome? The decision might be what are you going to do at church? Maybe the decision for you is, what are you going to do with church during this COVID season? The decision might be on what, are you going to be obedient to God? Or are you going to keep running? In that situation that you're facing, are you going to do it God's way? Or are you going to do it your own way? I don't know what the choice is in front of you, But I know this, with God there is always a choice. He will always bring you to a point of decision. And this morning is one of those moments. Be brave and choose. Or maybe you need to be brave this morning by cutting through the lies and take your stand against evil and confront it with the truth. Perhaps this needs to be done in your own life. Perhaps this needs to be done in a relationship. Perhaps this needs to be done in the workplace. I mean, the reality is, you know where it needs to happen. And now it's time to stand. Now, let me ask you a simple question. If there were 3 frogs sitting on a log and 2 decided to jump off, how many are left on the log? If there were 3 frogs on a log and 2 decided to jump off, how many are left on the log? Three. You go, is that a trick question? No. Because although everything begins with a decision, you haven't jumped off the log because you decided to jump off. You're still on the log until you actually jump off the log. You can decide until the cows come home, but as long as you're sitting on the log, you're still sitting on the log. You can say, I've decided to follow Jesus. You can wear the shirt, you can sing it, you can shout it, but until you're following Him, you're not following Him. Some of you have decided. Now it's time to cut through the lies. Now it's time to stand. Or maybe you need to be brave this morning by drawing your strength from God. My friends, evaluate your source. If anything, this pandemic has probably helped us a little more come to understand where our source of strength really comes from. Evaluate your source. Where does your source of strength come from? Maybe it's time to switch tanks. It's hard to be brave when you're not certain your source will always be there. And if that's you, whether it's getting off the fence or cutting through the lies or evaluating your source of strength, the bottom line is it's time to be brave. It's time to take a stand. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to do just that. So whether you are listening online at home or whether you are in your car in our parking lot today, this is your opportunity to respond. Listen, as awkward as it may seem or feel, this is about you responding to God's voice this morning and taking some practical steps to be His kind of brave. If this is you and you need to respond as a way to say, God, I'm hearing you. God, I'm responding. God, I'm going to take a step. God, I'm going to start. Then I want to ask you right now, if you're in your living room, to stand to your feet. No matter who's in the room with you, your kids, your family, your wife, your husband, your grandparents, your aunt, your uncle, your dog. If that's you this morning, in the living room, in your bedroom, stand to your feet right now. As a way of saying, God, I'm hearing you. If you're in the parking lot today, and this is you, you need to respond. And you're outside your car, and you need to respond to this, then I want you to stand right now where you're at. If you're in your car this morning, in the parking lot, and you can't get out, you can't whatever, I want you to honk your horn right now as a way to say, God, I'm responding to you right now. This is about you. It's not about me. This is about you saying, God, I'm hearing you. God, I'm responding to you. I want to do this your way. I want to be your kind of brave. So whether you are standing in your bedroom or living room or in our parking lot this morning, I want to pray for you. Lord, thank you for the sacrifice that you've made for us. As we come before you this morning, when we start this journey towards bravery together, I ask that you make us brave. Help us to make the choice to stand for you, to obey, to surrender to your will. Help us to cut through the lies. Give us discernment. Embolden us to stand for truth. And help us to draw our strength from you. Not from sources that run dry, not from sources that fail us, but from you, because true bravery requires your power within us. So Lord, I thank you in advance for what you're going to do. It'd be a waste of time for us to talk about being brave and not expect you to revolutionize our life as we stand for you. So I thank you in advance for the stories that are going to come out of this transformational process of you making us brave. The world needs more of God's kind of bravery. The world needs more of God's kind of bravery. And I believe that's why you placed us here. Use us. What we sing at the beginning of worship, all I am is yours. All I am is yours. And because of that, I'll stand. In Jesus' name, amen.
So I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who